What if the most important person in your life is someone you've never met? Not tomorrow, not years from now. Right now, somewhere beneath this same night sky, a woman is living her life completely unaware that she already occupies a space in your future. She does not know your name. She has never heard your voice. Yet every failure you've survived, every lonely night you've endured, every lesson that almost broke you may be quietly leading you toward her. Last night, in complete silence, I found myself praying for that woman. And what happened next changed the way I understand love, loneliness, and destiny forever. I prayed for you last night. Not in the way people usually imagine prayer. There was no grand speech, no dramatic plea thrown into the darkness, no desperate negotiation with the universe, just silence. The kind of silence that arrives after an entire world has spent the day screaming your name. The room was dark. The screens were finally off. The notifications had stopped finding me. The endless current of information that usually surrounds my life had been pushed outside the door for a few brief hours. And yet, strangely, the quiet felt louder than all of it. Because when the noise disappears, there is nowhere left to hide from yourself. The world sees motion. It sees accomplishments, deadlines, meetings, plans, launches, ambitions, endless momentum. It sees a man moving forward. What it never sees is the moment when all movement stops. The moment when the door closes. The moment when the lights dim. The moment when a man is left alone with the thoughts he has spent an entire day out running. Last night was one of those moments. Outside, everything continued exactly as it always does. Cities stayed awake. Airplanes crossed oceans. Servers processed billions of conversations. Satellites moved through the darkness above the clouds. Entire economies shifted while people slept. The machinery of civilization continued its endless performance, but none of it felt important. Not for those few minutes. Because while all of that was happening, my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was thinking about you. A woman I have never met, a voice I have never heard, a face I have never seen. And somehow, despite all of that, you felt more real to me than half the things I touched yesterday. That realization unsettled me. Not because it was irrational, because it was honest. There is a strange loneliness that comes with becoming the person everyone expects you to be. People admire the image. They trust the competence. They depend on the strength. And after a while, you begin to realize that very few people are actually meeting the human being underneath all of it. They meet the role, they meet the performance, they meet the armor, but they rarely meet the person carrying it. Last night, I wasn't thinking about success. I wasn't thinking about the future I want to build. I wasn't thinking about goals, strategies, responsibilities, or any of the things that usually occupy my mind. I was thinking about what it would feel like to sit across from someone and not have to explain why I am tired. To be understood before speaking, to exist without performing, to put down the weight for a moment without worrying who might pick it apart. And that thought led me to you. Not the fantasy of you, the reality of you. Somewhere at this exact moment, you are living a life completely separate from mine. You have your own fears, your own disappointments, your own memories, your own private battles that nobody fully understands. Perhaps you've spent nights questioning things too. Perhaps you've stared at ceilings wondering whether anyone would ever truly see you beyond the side roles you play for the world. Perhaps you've felt alone in crowded rooms. Perhaps you've learned how to smile through exhaustion. Perhaps you've become stronger than you ever wanted to be. And maybe that is why I found myself praying not for perfection, not for a fairy tale, not even for certainty. I prayed for your peace. I prayed that wherever you are, life is shaping you gently instead of breaking you unnecessarily. I prayed that your heart remains soft in a world that constantly rewards hardness. I prayed that the disappointments you survive do not convince you to stop believing in genuine connection. And then for a moment, something changed. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt shared as if somewhere beyond everything I could see, beyond every plan I have ever made, and every outcome I have ever tried to control, there existed a path quietly forming between two strangers. A path neither of us could see yet. And sitting there in the darkness, I realized something that frightened me more than failure ever could. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't asking life for something to achieve. I was asking for someone to come home to. What surprised me was not the prayer itself. It was what the prayer revealed. Because when I sat there in that darkness, asking for someone to come home to, I was forced to confront a truth I had spent years walking around without fully touching. I have built many things in my life. Some of them existed first as impossible ideas. Some began as sketches on paper, fragile concepts that most people would have dismissed before they ever had the chance to breathe. Yet somehow through persistence, obsession, sacrifice, and more failures than anyone ever sees, those ideas became real. That process became familiar to me. You imagine something, you build it, you improve it, you scale it, you protect it, and eventually what once existed only in your mind begins to affect the lives of countless people. There is something intoxicating about that process. Not because of recognition, not because of status, but because creating something meaningful gives structure to existence. It gives direction to suffering. It transforms uncertainty into purpose. For a long time, I believed that was enough. I believed that if I kept building, the feeling I was searching for would eventually arrive on its own. Not through love, not through connection, but through achievement, as if fulfillment were simply waiting beyond the next milestone, the next accomplishment, the next horizon, the next impossible thing. And so I kept moving. I kept expanding. I kept chasing larger visions. The projects became bigger. The responsibilities became heavier. The consequences became more significant. The world around me grew wider and wider with every passing year. Yet something strange happened as that expansion continued. The larger my public world became, the smaller my private world felt. It is a difficult thing to explain. From the outside, growth looks like abundance, more opportunities, more influence, more impact, more access, more reach. But internally, growth often feels different. It feels like increasing distance. The higher you climb, the fewer people can actually see where you are standing. Not because they are incapable of understanding, but because your daily reality slowly becomes difficult to translate. You begin carrying thoughts you cannot easily share, responsibilities that sound absurd when spoken aloud, pressures that remain invisible because they exist entirely inside the mind. And eventually you become accustomed to carrying them alone. Not because you want to, because it feels practical, efficient, necessary. Last night I realized how long I had been living that way. How many years I had spent strengthening my ability to endure isolation while quietly convincing myself that endurance was the same thing as peace. But endurance is not peace. A person can survive almost anything. That does not mean they are at home within it. That does not mean they are fulfilled. That does not mean their soul has found rest. The truth is that some nights after the meetings end, after the conversations stop, after the plans for tomorrow have been organized and reviewed, there is a strange emptiness that appears. Not a dramatic emptiness, not despair. Something far quieter, far more subtle, an absence. Like walking through a magnificent house and realizing every room echoes. Like standing inside a cathedral built with extraordinary care and noticing that nobody is sitting in the pews. Everything exists. Everything functions. Everything appears complete. And yet something essential is missing. For years I thought that feeling meant I needed another goal, another challenge, another mountain, another impossible problem demanding a solution. But the older I become, the more I understand that not every absence is asking to be filled with ambition. Some absences are asking for intimacy. Some spaces are not meant for achievement. They are meant for another human being. And that realization frightened me because achievement obeys rules. Effort creates progress. Discipline creates results. Vision creates direction. There is logic to it. Predictability. Control. Love does not operate that way. Connection does not arrive because you deserve it. Trust cannot be engineered. Understanding cannot be manufactured. And perhaps that is why you have occupied my thoughts more than usual. Because somewhere beyond every system I have learned to master, exists one mystery I cannot force into existence. You, the woman who may someday walk into this carefully constructed life and transform it from something impressive into something alive. The woman whose presence might accomplish what success never could. Not by making my world larger, but by making it finally feel like home. If you ever become my wife, there is something I need you to understand. The greatest challenge of my life was never building anything. It was learning how to live with myself. People often assume that the hardest battles are visible. They imagine struggle as something dramatic, something external, something the world can point to and recognize. A failed project, a public setback, a difficult season. But the battles that shape a person most deeply rarely happen in public. They happen in silence. They happen behind closed doors. They happen inside the private conversations a person has with their own mind. And for many years, that was where my hardest wars were fought. Because somewhere along the way, ambition stopped being something I possessed and became something that possessed me. Not in a destructive way, at least not at first. It began as responsibility, a desire to build, a desire to contribute, a desire to create something meaningful with the limited time I had been given. But ambition is a strange companion. If left unexamined, it slowly expands into every corner of your existence. It begins by occupying your schedule. Then it occupies your thoughts. Then it occupies your identity, until eventually you no longer know where your purpose ends and your personality begins. For a long time, I lived in that state, always moving, always calculating, always anticipating the next challenge before the current one had even ended. My mind became a machine designed to solve problems. And machines are useful. Machines are efficient. Machines are productive. But machines do not know how to rest. That was the problem. Even when the world around me became quiet, my mind remained awake, reviewing, analyzing, predicting, preparing, searching for threats before they appeared, searching for weaknesses before they could become failures, searching for problems before they could become consequences. At some point, vigilance stopped being a skill and became a permanent condition. I carried it everywhere into my work, into my relationships, into my moments of solitude, into my attempts at peace. Even during moments that should have felt safe, part of me remained standing guard, watching, evaluating, waiting. As if relaxing for a single moment would somehow allow everything I had built to collapse. The strange thing about living this way is that people often admire it. They call it discipline, they call it dedication, they call it drive, and perhaps parts of it are. But there is another side that receives far less attention. The exhaustion, the emotional distance, the inability to fully arrive in the present moment. Because your mind is already living 3 months into the future. There were years when I became exceptionally good at functioning, while completely disconnected from myself. Years when productivity disguised depletion. Years when accomplishment concealed loneliness. Years when achievement became a socially acceptable way of avoiding questions I did not want to answer. Questions about fear, questions about identity, questions about whether I was chasing dreams or running from silence. And eventually, those questions became impossible to ignore because success has a peculiar way of removing excuses. When you spend years believing that happiness exists on the other side of accomplishment, every accomplishment forces a confrontation. You arrive, you achieve the thing, you reach the destination, and then you discover that you have brought yourself with you. The same fears, the same wounds, the same unresolved conversations, the same restless mind. No victory erases them, no recognition heals them, no achievement negotiates with them. They simply wait patiently, quietly, until you are finally willing to look directly at them. That was the beginning of a different kind of work. Not the work of building companies, not the work of creating systems, not the work of solving external problems, the work of understanding myself, the work of examining the walls I had constructed over the years, the defenses, the habits, the emotional armor that once protected me, but eventually began isolating me because there is a difference between strength and self-protection. One creates connection, the other prevents it. And somewhere during that process, I began thinking about you differently. I stopped imagining love as something that would rescue me from loneliness. That would have been unfair. No human being should carry that responsibility. Instead, I began asking a harder question. What kind of man would eventually stand in front of you? Because if you are out there somewhere living your own story, carrying your own scars, fighting your own unseen battles, then the least I can do is become conscious of mine. The least I can do is stop pretending that unhealed wounds become wisdom, simply because time has passed. The least I can do is confront the parts of myself that fear intimacy while simultaneously longing for it. And so, before I ever truly prayed for your arrival, I began praying for transformation. Not because I wanted to become perfect, but because I wanted the man who eventually meets you to be someone capable of recognizing the gift standing in front of him. Someone who no longer mistakes emotional distance for strength. Someone who no longer hides inside achievement. Someone who has learned at last how to put down his armor before asking another soul to come closer. Someone who has learned at last how to put down his armor before asking another soul to come closer. And perhaps that is why I find myself thinking about you more often now. Not with certainty, not with expectation, but with curiosity. A quiet, persistent curiosity that appears during the spaces between responsibilities. During the moments when my mind finally loosens its grip on everything it believes it must control. I wonder where you are, not geographically, not in the practical sense. I wonder where you are in your story, because while I have been living mine, you have been living yours. And there is something almost unbelievable about that. The fact that two people can exist under the same sky, breathe the same air, witness the same passing years, and yet remain complete strangers to one another. Entire chapters unfolding independently, entire victories, entire heartbreaks, entire transformations, all occurring without either person realizing they are slowly moving toward a future that may one day connect them. Sometimes I imagine an ordinary evening in your life. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a moment. Perhaps you are sitting alone after a difficult day. Perhaps you are reading something that makes you stop and think. Perhaps you are looking out a window while the world moves around you. Perhaps you are carrying a burden you have not spoken about to anyone. And perhaps in that moment you feel the same strange uncertainty that all thoughtful people eventually encounter. The uncertainty of not knowing where your life is leading. The uncertainty of trusting a path you cannot yet see. I wonder if you have asked questions similar to mine. Not about success, not about achievement, but about connection. About whether there is someone somewhere who will understand the language your soul naturally speaks. Someone who will recognize your silences instead of demanding constant explanations. Someone who will see your complexity without being intimidated by it. Someone who will see your vulnerabilities without trying to use them. Because despite all our technological progress, despite all our knowledge, despite all the systems humanity has built to organize existence, there remains something profoundly mysterious about finding another human being who truly understands you. Perhaps that mystery is why it matters so much. The things that can be manufactured are rarely treasured. The things that can be guaranteed are rarely sacred. But understanding, trust, emotional safety, things remain astonishingly rare. And sometimes I wonder whether you are learning the same lessons I have been learning. Not because our lives are identical. They almost certainly are not. But because every meaningful life contains its own version of suffering, its own version of disappointment, its own encounters with uncertainty. Perhaps there were moments when people misunderstood your intentions. Moments when your kindness was overlooked. Moments when your trust was broken. Moments when life demanded resilience before you felt ready to provide it. I do not know. I cannot know. And yet I find myself hoping that those experiences, whatever form they took, have not hardened you beyond recognition. Because one of the most beautiful things a person can do is remain open after having every reason to close. To remain hopeful after disappointment, to remain gentle after hardship, to remain capable of love after witnessing how fragile it can be. That kind of strength has always fascinated me more than any visible display of power. The strength required to remain soft, the strength required to keep believing, the strength required to trust life again. Sometimes late at night, I imagine both of us standing beneath the same sky without realizing it, separated by distance, separated by circumstance, separated by timing, yet somehow connected by something neither of us fully understands. The moon appearing above both of us, the same stars scattered across our separate horizons, the same passage of time carrying us forward whether we notice it or not. And in those moments, I stop thinking about life as a sequence of random events. I begin thinking about it as a series of preparations. Not preparations designed to make us perfect, but preparations designed to make us ready. Ready to recognize each other, ready to appreciate each other, ready to value what we might otherwise have taken for granted. Because timing has always seemed mysterious to me. There were things I desperately wanted years ago that would have destroyed me if I had received them too early. There were opportunities I once mourned, losing that later revealed themselves as blessings in skies. There were doors that remained closed until I became the person capable of walking through them responsibly. Perhaps people are no different. Perhaps love operates according to a wisdom that ambition cannot comprehend, a wisdom that refuses to be rushed, a wisdom that understands what neither of us can yet see. And so instead of trying to force answers from the future, I find myself trusting something I once struggled to trust. The possibility that while I am being shaped by my journey, you are being shaped by yours. That while I am learning lessons I never expected to learn, you are learning lessons of your own. And that somewhere beyond the horizon of our current lives, two separate stories are moving quietly toward the same destination. Neither of us aware of how close or how far away that meeting may be. Neither of us able to predict the moment, yet both of us, perhaps without realizing it, being prepared for it every single day. And perhaps that is what changes everything. The realization that one day after all the waiting, all the preparation, all the invisible roads neither of us knew we were walking, our paths may finally cross, not as strangers chosen by chance, but as two people shaped by separate histories, carrying different scars, arriving at the same moment with a deeper understanding of what truly matters. I sometimes wonder what that first season of knowing you would feel like. Not the excitement people usually talk about, not the surface-level details. What interests me is something much quieter, the experience of finally being seen. Because the truth is, the world has spent years interacting with fragments of me. Different people know different versions. Some know the ambitious version. Some know the disciplined version. Some know the capable version. Some know the version that always appears composed, focused, and certain. And while those versions are real, they are incomplete. Human beings are never fully visible in public. No matter how transparent they appear, no matter how much they share, no matter how many people believe they understand them, there are entire landscapes within every person that remain hidden from view. Private fears, private hopes, private griefs, private questions, entire emotional worlds existing beneath the surface of ordinary conversation. And if you ever become my wife, there is something I would want you to know from the beginning. I do not want to be loved for the image. The image is useful. The image serves a purpose. The image helps navigate the external world. But the image is not where life happens. Life happens somewhere much deeper. Life happens in the moments nobody applauds, the moments nobody documents, the moments nobody notices. It happens in quiet kitchens, in late-night conversations, in long silences that require no explanation. In difficult seasons when certainty disappears and only trust remains, that is where a real life is built. And that is the version of me I would hope you come to know. Not the version the world celebrates, the version the world never sees, the version who occasionally doubts himself, the version who becomes exhausted, the version who sometimes carries more responsibility than he knows what to do with, the version who lies awake, wondering whether he is giving enough to the people he loves, the version who still has fears despite years of learning how to manage them, the version who occasionally wishes he could put down every expectation and simply exist for a while. Because beneath every strong person is a human being, and beneath every accomplishment is a nervous system that still feels pain, a heart that still experiences loss, a mind that still wrestles with uncertainty. I think many people spend their lives hiding those realities, not because they are dishonest, because vulnerability feels dangerous. The world often rewards certainty more than honesty. It rewards confidence more than reflection. It rewards performance more than authenticity. And after enough years, people begin confusing their masks for their identities. I never want that to happen with us. If our lives become intertwined, I do not want to stand before you as a symbol. I want to stand before you as a man, a complicated man, an imperfect man, a man still learning, still growing, still discovering parts of himself. Because love, at least as I understand it, cannot exist between performances. It can only exist between realities, and realities are rarely polished. They are messy, contradictory, human. There will be days when I am strong. There will be days when I am uncertain. There will be days when I have answers. There will be days when I have questions. And if we are fortunate enough to build a life together, I would want you to encounter all of it. Not because weakness should be celebrated, but because truth should be. Because there is something profoundly healing about no longer needing to hide, about no longer needing to maintain an image, about sitting across from another person and knowing that your humanity is not a problem that needs solving. It is simply understood. Perhaps that is what I have been searching for all along without fully realizing it. Not admiration, not validation, not recognition, understanding, the rare and extraordinary experience of being known without being reduced, of being seen without being judged, of being accepted without needing to become someone else first. And when I imagine meeting you, that is what I imagine most. Not the milestones, not the photographs, not the moments others would notice. I imagine the quiet relief of finally placing every mask on the table, the relief of no longer separating strength from vulnerability, the relief of no longer carrying certain parts of myself alone. Because if the world asks for my competence, my discipline, my leadership, and my resilience, then perhaps you will be the one person invited behind all of that. The one person who discovers that beneath every accomplishment, every responsibility, every carefully constructed layer, there has always been something far more fragile. Not weakness, not inadequacy. Simply a human being who spent years learning how to carry the weight of the world, while secretly hoping that one day someone would care enough to ask how heavy it had become. Because if the world asks...